Listen to me. There is a moment in every man's life when he is no longer interested in negotiating the bare minimum. A moment when his silence becomes louder than his explanations, more deliberate than his pleas, and more powerful than his presence ever was when it was taken for granted. You understand? That moment is not bitterness. It is not revenge. It is not punishment. It is clarity. Let me tell you something. Silence, when born from self-respect, is not cold. It is sacred. You see, there's a misconception that silence is cruel, that to withdraw is to injure. But hear me now. Not all silence is created equal. There is a silence that screams abandonment. Yes. But then there's another kind, a stillness that doesn't seek to hurt, but to heal. A silence that is not about withholding love, but reclaiming it. And that silence is not an act of war. It is an act of self-preservation. There comes a time when words no longer carry weight, when everything you could possibly say has been said and still nothing shifts. That is when the power of silence rises. Because silence is not the absence of feeling. It is the culmination of it. It is what happens when a man's heart gets tired of being its own interpreter, constantly translating his needs to deaf ears. Silence is not passive. It's purposeful. When you fall quiet, you are not stepping down. You are stepping away. You are no longer engaging in cycles that loop back to your own depletion. You are no longer filling the space with reassurances, questions, or justifications. Instead, you're choosing to sit with yourself, to prioritize the serenity of your own energy over the chaos of someone else's inconsistency. That is not punishment. That is protections. That is peace. Peace is not loud. It doesn't need to be. It does not chase. It does not convince. Peace doesn't have to announce its arrival. It simply becomes the standard. And when you decide that peace matters more than being understood by someone unwilling to meet you halfway, you step into your highest power. People think strength is confrontation, that to be strong is to speak up, fight, argue, cry louder, beg harder, explain deeper. But sometimes, my brother, the real strength is silence. In choosing not to attend every argument you're invited to, in not defending yourself to people committed to misunderstanding you, in walking away from conversations where your soul is slowly bleeding. That kind of silence is ferocious. That kind of silence changes the dynamic. Not because it manipulates, but because it liberates. When you go silent, you're not erasing your story. You're rewriting its ending. You're reclaiming authorship. You're saying, this narrative no longer serves me, so I won't contribute another word to it. There's a power that awakens the moment you choose yourself quietly. The kind of power that doesn't need to make declarations or dramatics. The kind of power that rests gently but firmly in self-worth. And when that kind of power rises, it speaks volumes without a sound. Some will call it distance. Some will call it selfishness. Some will call it dramatic. But only you know the truth. Only you know the miles you walked emotionally before choosing the quiet road. Only you know the toll of being loud about your needs in spaces that couldn't hold them. So when you go silent, you are not disappearing. You are not giving up. You are re-entering. And if that silence is misunderstood, so be it. Not everything is meant to be understood by everyone. Everything can't be taken and safely tossed away. Sometimes your peace will confuse people who only knew the version of you that tolerated discomfort. Sometimes your absence will be perceived as cold by those who once thrived on your warmth but never protected it. Let that be their discomfort to sit with, not yours to resolve. You don't owe anyone a performance of your pain. You don't have to narrate every heartbreak or defend every boundary. You don't have to validate your healing process to people who didn't value your wholeness. You don't have to explain why you stopped responding, stopped reaching out, stopped engaging. Some things are simply sacred. Some decisions are made in silence, but backed by an ocean of self-respect. There is a version of you that tried, that gave, that compromised, that hoped, that stayed, that explained, that waited, that bent. That version of you was necessary for your evolution, but he is not required to stick around forever. Eventually, the version of you who is tired of his peace being optional will rise, and he will not raise his voice. He will not plead. He will not write another paragraph. He will simply fall silent. And that silence will not be empty. It will be full of the wisdom gathered from every unreciprocated effort, full of the grace that forgave without apology, full of the love that never left but just stopped leaking. That silence will be your sanctuary. Let the world adjust to your quiet. Let the noise pass through without needing to respond. Let the echoes of your silence remind others that you are no longer accessible to chaos. Let your absence speak the truth your words were too gentle to deliver. Let your stillness be the statement. You don't need to warn anyone. You're done. You don't need to announce your peace. Peace doesn't knock. It doesn't scream. It doesn't post status updates. Peace just is. And when you embody it, truly embody it, the energy shift is undeniable. Suddenly, the patterns you once tolerated become foreign. The people who once rattled your nervous system no longer reach you. The triggers dissolve. The noise fades. And you finally hear the only voice that matters, your own. A man who has chosen silence to protect his peace has made the ultimate declaration. I will no longer fight to be seen in places that refuse to see themselves. There is nothing cold about that. That is the warmest embrace you can offer yourself. That is self-love without the performance. That is healing without the ceremony. That is growth without the need to announce it. You will find that silence is not a void. It is a vessel that holds your new standards, your new values, your new level of emotional hygiene. And those who are aligned with your growth will feel that silence and recognize it not as a wall, but as a doorway into a deeper connection, one that doesn't require noise to be meaningful. Let them call it what they want. Let them guess. Let them assume. What matters is that you know your intention. You know your worth. You know that in choosing silence, you are not being cruel. You are being clear. And that kind of clarity doesn't shout. It simply radiates. Eventually, someone will notice. Not because you forced their attention, but because your absence created space. Space for reflection. Space for accountability. Space for the recognition that what you gave so freely, so consistently was not guaranteed. Lord, hear me. Give me the necessary wisdom, skills, love, and action so I can learn how to heal. You're accessing the gift. Space for reflection, space for accountability, space for reconciliation, space for the guarantee. But you're not waiting for that. That's the point. Silence is not a game of watch me leave. It's not a test to see who follows us. It's the result of finally understanding that some things cannot be salvaged through sound. Some things must be let go in the stillness. In your silence, you will remember what it feels like to breathe without tension. You will feel your nervous system unclench. You will feel joy in the small moments again. because your energy is no longer bleeding into conversations that never evolve. You will realize how much noise you were tolerating, not just from others, but from your own internal dialogue. The overthinking, the analysis, the wondering, the waiting that too begins to dissolve in silence. Because silence invites presence, and presence is the antidote to anxiety. You don't have to explain your silence. It is not a language for everyone. It is a language of self-honoring, and only those who respect your stillness will ever deserve your sound again. When your silence is misunderstood, remember this. Your job is not to be understood by those who were never listening in the first place. Your job is to listen to yourself now, to trust that your inner knowing led you here, not out of spite, but out of truth. You are allowed to change how you engage. You are allowed to evolve past the need to fill space. You are allowed to detach gracefully and completely. You are allowed to walk away without making noise. Because when the soul is tired, rest is not optional. It is vital. And silence is the first sound of healing. So let it be misunderstood. Let it be questioned. Let it be talked about. But most of all, let it protect you. Because you are not punishing anyone by going quiet. You are not abandoning. You are not manipulating. You are reclaiming, re-entering, rebuilding. And when the time is right, when peace is no longer fragile but fortified, maybe your voice returns. Not out of need, not out of pressure, but out of choice. That is the difference. That is the transformation. A man who finds power in his silence has nothing left to prove, only something left to protect. And that is his peace. There's a moment when your presence no longer speaks the way it used to, when your availability becomes background noise, not music. And that is the moment you realize something deeply confronting, that your words, your effort, your emotions, your explanations, they have become part of the wallpaper. Familiar, predictable, dismissed. You don't arrive at that moment overnight. It comes slowly, like the erosion of a shore. You offer pieces of yourself, hoping someone sees the value. You stay just a little longer, thinking perhaps it's your timing. You explain yourself again and again, assuming maybe your words just weren't clear enough. You reach out not because you're weak, but because your heart still believes connection is possible. Until finally you wake up not angry, not even hurt anymore, just done. There's a quiet kind of dignity that rises in the moment you decide that your presence will no longer be wasted in places where it is expected but not appreciated. It's not a loud exit. It's not a dramatic goodbye. It's not a long letter. It's not a final plea. It's simply absence. And make no mistake, absence has a language of its own. It speaks in echoes, in voids, in spaces that were once filled with your warmth, your effort, your consistency. Your absence says, I am no longer offering what you assume would always be there. It whispers truths that your words never could, because your absence cannot be interrupted, misinterpreted, or talked over. It simply is. There is nothing more sobering than the sudden silence of someone who once showed up daily with open-hearted energy. Because people rarely notice the water they swim in until the tide pulls back and leaves them standing alone in silence.
Words are valuable. Yes.
But presence, true, consistent, vulnerable presence, that's currency. And when that presence vanishes, it leaves behind an emptiness so loud it forces a reckoning. But here's the secret. The echo of your absence isn't just for others to hear. It's for you too. It's your own reminder that your energy is not infinite. That your soul is not a buffet for anyone who wanders by hungry for attention. Listen to me. We have to value the evident heart that we have for all people who walk this earth. That your soul is not a buffet for anyone who wanders by hungry for attention. That your love is not a limitless supply to be rationed out until depletion. That your time, your care, your commitment are sacred. And when they're not valued, you don't protest, you withdraw. This isn't about revenge. It's not about withholding to hurt. It's about recognizing when your presence has become too accessible to be appreciated. There's a difference between being available and being taken for granted. And when you cross that invisible line enough times, you start to realize that the most powerful thing you can ever do is leave the room without slamming the door. Your absence becomes your clarity. You stop explaining. You stop proving. You stop performing emotional CPR on connections that are spiritually flatlined. You stop auditioning for roles you were born to play. And you let the silence carry the message your voice has been trying to express for far too long. Your absence isn't cold. It's calibrated. It's intentional. It's a recalibration of your standards. Let them feel it. Let them feel what life is like without your encouragement, your support, your check-ins, your deep presence. Let them notice the void. Not because you want them to hurt, but because you need to heal. Because you finally understand being constantly available to those who don't cherish you is an act of self-abandonment. You emphasizing self-abandonment and you are done abandoning yourself. You are done being the only one keeping the thread alive. You are done interpreting silence as a challenge. You are done over-delivering where there's underinvestment. You are done waiting to be chosen when you should have walked away the moment your value had to be explained. Your absence is not about teaching a lesson. It's about reclaiming a life. Because here's the truth. When you're present in a situation that drains you, you shrink slowly, subtly, almost imperceptibly at first. You second guess your instincts. You question your expectations. You water yourself down. And before long, you've become a shadow of the man who used to walk into rooms with light in his eyes and peace in his spirit. But absence is the moment he returns. Absence is the beginning of restoration. You will find in that space you once filled so freely that you begin to hear your own voice again. Not the noise of trying to be understood. Not the chaos of trying to be enough. Just your voice calm, clear, powerful. Not seeking permission, not asking to be seen, just being. That's where the healing begins. And that's when you realize your absence isn't a void. It's a mirror. It reflects everything your presence was holding up. And sometimes the reflections is uncomfortable for them perhaps, but also for you, because now you have to face your own truth. The truth of how long you stayed hoping things would change. The truth of how much you gave without reciprocity. The truth of how long you kept talking when silence was what your soul was begging for. But don't run from that truth. Own it. Honor it. Let it guide you forward, not with resentment, but with wisdom. Because once you've experienced the power of your own absence, you start to protect your presence differently. You don't offer it recklessly. You don't throw it at people hoping they'll finally see you. You don't offer discounts on your dignity. You become selective, not because you're guarded, but because you're grounded. You know what it costs to overextend. You know what it feels like to pour yourself out into someone else's emptiness and call it love. You know what it means to carry both sides of a connection while pretending you're not crumbling. So now your presence becomes a privilege, not a default. And those who truly see you, who truly value you, they'll feel the absence and not panic, but act. They'll reflect. They'll rise. They'll recalibrate. Not because you demanded it, but because the silence held up a mirror they couldn't avoid. But even if they don't, that's not your concern anymore. Your journey isn't about being missed. It's about being aligned. And sometimes the path to alignment begins with subtraction. You subtract your voice from rooms that don't listen. You subtract your effort from places that don't match it. You subtract your warmth from spaces that turn cold the moment you stop performing. And in that subtraction, you discover something extraordinary. Peace. Peace that doesn't need explanation. Peace that doesn't require permission. Peace that isn't negotiable. Your absence will echo not because you're gone, but because the version of you that allowed himself to be overlooked no longer exists. And what remains is not bitter, but better. Not hard, but healed. Not closed, but clear. You will walk into new spaces with a different frequency. One that says, I am not here to convince anyone of my worth. I am not here to prove I belong. I am not here to beg for connection. I am here to be met or to move on. Because you now know the weight of your presence. You now understand that not everyone deserves access to your softness, your care, your emotional labor. That your energy is not a community resource. It's a sacred offering. Let your absence do the work your words no longer can. Let it speak in silences too loud to ignore. Let it echo not just in others' memories, but in your own transformation. You are no longer a man who waits to be valued. You are a man who walks in value quietly, unapologetically, powerfully. And when you leave, it will not be with drama or desperation. It will be with peace. Because your absence carried with grace will say everything that needs to be said and nothing more. Closure. It's the final chapter you keep waiting for. The neatly tied bow. The conversation that explains the chaos. The sentence that makes the silence make sense. It's the one thing you think you need to move on. The permission slip for your healing. The validation that what you felt was real. The final word that settles everything spinning in your heart. But what if I told you the idea of closure, the way we've been taught to crave it, is a myth? What if closure doesn't come through dialogue, but through distance? What if you don't get closure from someone else at all because you become it? There is a moment in every man's life where he realizes he has been sitting at a locked door, knocking gently, sometimes frantically, just hoping someone opens it and says what he needs to hear. But what he doesn't see, not at first, is that the key isn't on the other side. The key has always been in his hand. And that locked door, it's not a boundary. It's a mirror. You keep thinking, if you could just understand why, you'd be able to breathe again. If you could just know what really happened, why it fell apart, why the shift occurred, why the words stopped matching the actions, then you'd have peace. But that's not peace. That's addiction to an ending you didn't control. Let that go. You don't need closure. What you need is space. Enough space from the noise, from the push-pull, from the confusion to finally hear yourself. You keep chasing closure like it's a door someone else is supposed to walk through, holding all the answers. But that chase is what's keeping you stuck. Because the truth is, if they could have given you peace, they would have. And if you have to beg for clarity, it's already contaminated. Closure doesn't happen in someone's explanation. It happens in your decision. The decision to stop waiting for permission to move on. The decision to no longer seek healing from the same place that hurt you. The decision to let the unanswered questions remain unanswered because your peace doesn't hinge on someone else's emotional maturity. Closure is not a gift you receive. It's a boundary you build. It begins in the moment you stop reaching out, the moment you stop needing one more conversation to make it make sense, the moment you choose to sit with the pain instead of outsourcing it to someone else's understanding. That is where you begin to reclaim yourself. Not through their words, but through your silence. Not through their explanation, but through your evolution. You become your own closure when you realize that not every story was meant to have a satisfying ending. Some stories were meant to teach, to shake you, to break you open in places you didn't know were still locked. Some stories arrive as mirrors, not companions, and your job isn't to fix them. Your job is to learn what they revealed. You wanted closure, to feel like justice, but sometimes closure looks like a quiet decision no one else hears. A moment where you stand in the stillness and instead of chasing the ending you wanted, you walk into the beginning you need. That's what distance gives you. Distance is not avoidance. It's alignment. It's where your nervous system begins to relax because you're no longer in emotional survival mode. It's where your self-worth reawakens because it's no longer being bartered in an emotional casino. It's where you start to see clearly, not through the lens of craving, but through the lens of clarity. When you're in the middle of it, everything feels distorted. You overthink, you replay, you analyze, you craft texts you never send, you journal endlessly trying to decode the ending, you perform emotional autopsies on every moment trying to locate the moment it all turned. But the deeper you go, the more you lose yourself. You get addicted to understand instead of detaching. And that's when you have to stop. Distance is the detox. It's the pause, the reset, the clarity you are never going to find inside a tangled mess of mixed signals and emotional inconsistency. You want closure? Take a step back, then another, and don't look back. Not because you don't care, but because you care about yourself now more than you care about getting the perfect ending. The truth is, the people who break you rarely stay to help you rebuild. That's not their job. It was never supposed to be. Healing was always going to be your journey, your power, your reclamation. And it begins when you stop trying to rewrite the last chapter and start writing a new one. Even if the pen shakes, you're not broken because they never said goodbye properly. You're not broken because they didn't give you answers. You're heartbroken. But heartbroken is not your identity. It's a season, a powerful, transformative one. And if you choose it, if you stop resisting it, that heartbreak becomes your awakening. You start to realize that the closure you craved wasn't actually about them. It was about you wanting to feel worthy, you wanting to feel like you mattered, you wanting to feel seen, heard, chosen. But that's not their job anymore. It never truly was. You don't need someone to validate your experience in order for it to be real. You don't need someone to say, yes, I messed up, for you to believe you deserve better. You don't need anyone to stamp your heartbreak with authenticity. You lived it. You felt it. It changed you. That's enough. Distance is your sanctuary now. It's the space where you remember who you were before you were made to question your instincts. It's where you reclaim your dignity. It's where you begin to speak to yourself gently again. It's where you stop performing and start processing. It's where your worth no longer negotiates with silence. Don't confuse distance with weakness. There is nothing braver than walking away from the very thing you thought would complete you once you realize it's slowly dismantling you. Closure is not a conversation. It's a conviction. The conviction that you don't need anyone to tell you when it's time to let go. You can feel it in your bones, in the heaviness that doesn't lift, in the way your joy feels quieter when you're around them, in the way your confidence starts to dim, in the way your intuition whispers then screams, and you keep silencing it. Distance honors that voice. You become closure when you choose peace over chaos, when you stop asking people to meet you where they never intended to go, when you refuse to chase what needs to be chosen freely, when you close the book without needing applause or understanding, just because you finally realized the story was costing you too much. You don't become closure in a single day. It's a process, 1,000 tiny choices, 100 lonely mornings where you resist the urge to reach out, an ocean of thoughts you don't act on, a deep breath when you want to spiral, a journal entry instead of a message, a walk alone instead of waiting for company that never comes, a goodbye you whisper only to yourself. And slowly, the volume of that craving begins to fade. Slowly, your energy returns to you. Slowly, the questions stop mattering. Slowly, your heart unhooks from the need to be heard by someone who never truly listened. Slowly, the ache becomes a scar. And that scar, that's your badge. Not of defeat, but of transcendence. You survived something you thought would destroy you. Not because someone came back and fixed it, but because you finally walked away from the fire and stopped standing in the smoke. That's what becoming closure looks like. You stop rehearsing conversations that will never happen. You stop waiting for validation that may never arrive. You stop believing that healing only begins when someone else gives you the green light. You start living. You start laughing again. First cautiously, then deeply. You start sleeping through the night without dreaming of what's. You start seeing beauty again in places you forgot to look. You start recognizing the reflection in the mirror. Not the broken version, but the braver one. The one who stayed when everyone else left. The one who held your heart through the storm. You don't get closure. You are closure. And once you realize that, everything changes. The need to understand turns into the power to release. The pain becomes perspective. The waiting becomes walking. And the silence that becomes your sanctuary. You don't need to go back and finish the story. You already lived it. Now it's time to begin a new one. Not with questions, not with craving, but with courage. Walk forward. Walk strong. Walk alone if you must, but walk. Because every step away from the past is a step into the man you were always becoming. And he doesn't beg for closure anymore. He breathes it. Not every storm arrives with thunder. Not every ending needs fireworks. And not every departure requires an audience. Sometimes the most unforgettable moment is when a man simply detaches. No explosions, no grand speech, no chaos, just quiet, deliberate distance. Not because he's weak, but because he's wise. Not because he's defeated, but because he's done. And that kind of detachment, that's the one people feel the deepest. Not in the moment it happens, but in every moment after. Because when a man detaches without drama, he's not trying to prove a point. He's not trying to wound. He's not trying to win. He's not angling for sympathy or stirring guilt. He's simply choosing himself finally. And when he chooses himself in silence, that silence echoes in ways no words ever could. There is a unique power in a man who no longer needs noise to communicate his worth. A man who no longer argues, pleads, begs, or performs. A man who's realized that his value isn't up for debate, and so he takes it off the table. You see, detachment is often misunderstood. People assume it means shutting down, giving up, growing cold. But real detachment, the kind that's unforgettable, is born from clarity, not cruelty. It's not anger that makes a man detach with grace. It's awareness. Awareness of his own exhaustion. Awareness of the emotional math that never adds up. Awareness that being available doesn't mean being valued. Awareness that the more he gave, the more he lost himself in return. And once that awareness sets in, it shifts everything. He doesn't raise his voice. He doesn't post cryptic messages. He doesn't declare that he's done, because he knows if you have to announce your absence, it means you still want to be noticed. But this man, he doesn't want to be noticed anymore. He wants peace. He wants his energy back. He wants his power in his own hands, not in someone else's pockets. So he quietly reclaims it. He pulls his attention inward. He stops asking questions that never got answered anyway. He stops explaining himself to people who never truly listened. He stops hoping someone else will realize what they had while they still have it. He realizes it's not his job to teach someone how to treat him. It's his responsibility to enforce the standard by walking away the moment it's not met. And when he does, he leaves behind something far more haunting than rage. He leaves behind stillness. Stillness where there used to be sound. Absence where there used to be devotion. Silence where there used to be softness. And that silence, that's what lingers. Because the world is used to men who plead, men who stay, men who keep trying long past the point of emotional erosion. The world expects drama. It knows how to respond to chaos. It's built for theatrics. But when he chooses none of that, when he just leaves quietly with his dignity intact, no one knows how to handle it. That's what makes him unforgettable. Not the drama he avoided, but the peace he protected. Not the goodbye he screamed, but the decision he whispered to himself in the middle of the night when he finally knew it was time. Because detachment doesn't happen in a moment. It happens in fragments, in realizations that stack over time, in disappointments that turn into data, in tears that finally dry without apology. It happens the day he stops replaying the same conversation in his head. The day he reads the message and doesn't respond, not because he's trying to appear strong, but because he is. The day he no longer measures his worth by how much he can endure. He detaches not because he doesn't care, but because he finally cares about himself. And in that care, in that stillness, in that self-protection, he becomes unforgettable. Because true detachment isn't about removing emotion. It's about no longer allowing emotion to compromise your alignment. It's about no longer handing your joy to someone else like a gift they never earned. It's about no longer sacrificing your peace to feed someone else's ego. It's about looking at your reflection and seeing someone you refuse to abandon again. That is unforgettable. And the world will notice. Not right away, not in the moment he goes quiet, but slowly in the echo of his absence, in the weight of his silence, in the space he used to occupy with his presence, his laughter, his vulnerability, his softness. They'll look for him not in desperation, but in realization. They'll scroll through memories. They'll search for that energy in others. They'll try to fill the void he left with noise, distractions, replacements, but nothing hits the same. Because what he offered was never just attention. It was soul. And once you've tasted presence that deep, Everything else feels like paper. It looks the same, but it doesn't hold the same. And he knows this now. That's why he doesn't chase. That's why he doesn't return. That's why he doesn't check in to see if his absence made a dent. He doesn't need to know, because detachment is not about waiting for someone else to recognize what they lost. It's about recognizing what you gained. You gained your voice back. You gained clarity. You gained energy that was once scattered and now lives fully in your own body. You gain mornings that feel like freedom instead of confusion. Nights that feel like rest instead of overthinking. A mind that no longer spins trying to decipher mixed signals. You gained you. And that version of you, that's the one who walks into rooms with a new kind of presence. One that says, I'm not here to perform for connection. I'm not here to earn belonging. I'm not here to be tolerated. I'm here to be met, or I'm gone. No theatrics, no threats, just truth. That's what makes him unforgettable. Not the volume of his departure, but the power of his return. Because when he returns to himself, when he takes all the energy he gave away and pours it into his own becoming, he becomes unstoppable. He becomes the kind of man who's remembered not for how he clung, but for how he released. Not for how loudly he left, but for how peacefully he rose. Not for how much he gave, but for how wisely he began to give it. He becomes the standard that others measure against and rarely meet. Because once a man learns how to detach without drama, he never returns to who he was. He knows too much. He's seen the truth behind the noise. He understands now that his power isn't in how much he can hold, but in how firmly he can let go. Let them wonder. Let them reach out into the void he left behind. Let them scroll back through the history and see all the moments he stayed when he should have walked. Let them replay the chances, the grace, the effort. Let them feel his absence. But he doesn't feel empty. He feels full of clarity, full of truth, full of power, full of the kind of self-respect that doesn't need validation. He walks differently now. He speaks differently now. He chooses differently now because detachment gave him back his discernment. And from this place, he builds something new. Something that doesn't require him to beg. Something that doesn't ask him to shrink. Something that doesn't come with conditions. But here's the part that no one tells you. Detachment doesn't mean you don't feel. It means you finally feel everything without dilution. You feel the ache, you feel the loss, you feel the mourning of potential, but you let it pass through you. You don't fight it. You don't resist it. You don't beg it to go away. You let it move until it moves you. And once you've been moved by truth, you can't go back to illusion. That's the gift of detachment. It doesn't leave you empty. It leaves you clean, cleansed of confusion, cleansed of doubt, cleansed of the version of you who kept breaking yourself to fit into a frame you outgrew. And what remains? Stillness, strength, serenity. The kind of quiet that isn't heavy, but holy. Because a man who detaches without drama is not empty. He is evolved. He doesn't walk away in anger. He walks away in alignment. He doesn't chase. He attracts. He doesn't explain. He embodies. And that energy is unforgettable. Not because he wanted to leave an impression, but because he finally decided to stop leaving himself. And once he made that decision, everything changed. The energy shifted. The power returned. And the story ended not with a scream, but with a silence so pure, so profound, so final. It said everything without a single word.